Imagine walking into a room where every single object has meaning, where nothing is excess, and where the very emptiness speaks louder than any decoration could. This isn't just interior design. This is a philosophy that has guided humanity for over 2,000 years. And today, it's quietly revolutionizing how millions of people approach their daily lives. Welcome to the fascinating intersection of Stoicism and minimalism, two powerful philosophies that, when combined, reveal a profound truth that less truly can mean more. But this isn't about empty rooms or sparse living spaces. This is about something far deeper, far more transformative. Picture Marcus Aurelius, the most powerful man in the ancient world, writing in his personal journal. Very little is needed to make a happy life. It is all within yourself, in your way of thinking. Here was an emperor who could have anything he desired, yet he understood something that modern consumer culture desperately wants us to forget: that true wealth isn't measured by what we accumulate, but by what we can live without while still finding deep satisfaction and meaning. The Stoics of ancient Greece and Rome weren't ascetics living in caves. They were merchants, soldiers, emperors, and teachers who discovered that by focusing on what truly matters, virtue, wisdom, justice, and courage, everything else becomes surprisingly manageable. They practiced what we might call philosophical minimalism centuries before the term was ever coined. Today, as we're bombarded with advertisements promising happiness through the next purchase, as our homes overflow with possessions that somehow leave us feeling empty, as our schedules become cluttered with activities that drain rather than energize us, these ancient insights offer something revolutionary: a way to strip away the unnecessary and discover what actually creates a meaningful life. But here's what makes this combination so powerful. Stoicism provides the philosophical framework, the why behind living with less, while minimalism offers the practical tools, the how, to implement these timeless principles in our modern world. When Marcus Aurelius wrote about the discipline of desire, he was essentially describing what minimalists today call intentional living. When Epictetus taught about focusing only on what we can control, he was outlining the very mindset that allows someone to find contentment with fewer possessions. This isn't about deprivation or living a sparse, joyless existence. It's about abundance, but abundance of the right things. It's about creating space, physical, mental, and emotional space, for what truly enriches our lives. It's about understanding that every yes to something unnecessary is a no to something that might be essential. Throughout this exploration, we'll discover how ancient Stoic practices can transform our relationship with material possessions, how the pursuit of virtue naturally leads to a more minimalist lifestyle, and how embracing less can paradoxically give us access to so much more time, more clarity, more peace, and more authentic happiness. The journey we're about to embark on isn't just about decluttering your closet or organizing your desk, though those might be beautiful side effects. This is about decluttering your entire approach to life, organizing your priorities, and discovering that the path to more joy, more meaning, more fulfillment often runs directly through the practice of choosing less. So where exactly did this profound understanding begin, and why does it matter more today than perhaps ever before? To truly grasp how Stoicism and minimalism work together, we need to journey back to ancient Athens, to a painted porch called the Stoa Poikile, where around 300 BCE, a philosopher named Zeno began teaching ideas that would fundamentally challenge how humans think about happiness, success, and the good life. The Stoics made a radical observation that feels almost revolutionary in our current age of endless consumption. They noticed that human suffering rarely comes from lacking material things, but rather from our attachment to them, our fear of losing them, and our constant craving for more. Epictetus, who began his life as a slave and ended it as one of the most respected teachers in Rome, understood this truth intimately. He taught that freedom isn't about having the power to acquire anything you want. It's about wanting nothing that you don't already possess or cannot control. But here's where it gets fascinating for our modern context. The Stoics weren't preaching poverty or self-denial for its own sake. They were practicing what we might call strategic detachment, a conscious choice to hold material possessions lightly so that these things could serve them rather than enslaving them. Marcus Aurelius owned vast wealth, yet he wrote, "Remember that very little is needed to make a happy life." Seneca was one of the richest men in Rome, yet he regularly practiced voluntary discomfort, giving up luxuries for periods of time to remind himself that his happiness didn't depend on them. This practice of voluntary simplicity wasn't about punishment, it was about liberation. When you know you can be content with less, you become immune to the fear of loss that drives so much of human anxiety. When you understand that your happiness doesn't depend on external circumstances, you gain a type of freedom that no amount of money can buy. The Stoics called this autarky, self-sufficiency, not in terms of isolation, but in terms of inner resources. Now, fast forward 2 millennia to our current moment. We live in what historians might call the most materially abundant period in human history, yet rates of anxiety, depression, and general life dissatisfaction continue to climb. We have more stuff than any generation before us, yet surveys consistently show that people felt more satisfied with their lives in previous decades when they owned significantly less. The Stoics would not be surprised by this paradox. They predicted it. Seneca wrote extensively about what he called the poverty of abundance, the way that having too many options, too many possessions, too many distractions can actually impoverish our experience of life. He observed that people who constantly acquire new things are like people drinking salt water. The more they consume, the thirstier they become. This insight strikes at the heart of why minimalism has become such a powerful movement in our current cultural moment. The Stoic approach to material possessions was beautifully practical. They practiced what they called preferred indifference, recognizing that while some external things might be naturally preferable to others, none of them are essential for human flourishing. Health is generally preferable to sickness, wealth to poverty, but the Stoic understands that their fundamental well-being, their ability to live with virtue and wisdom, doesn't depend on these external circumstances. This creates what we might call philosophical minimalism, a way of approaching possessions, commitments, and even relationships with clarity about what truly serves your highest values and what merely clutters your life with unnecessary complexity. When Epictetus taught his students to ask themselves, "Is this up to me or not?" about every situation they encountered, he was giving them a tool for cutting through the noise of modern life and focusing on what actually matters. The beauty of this ancient wisdom is that it provides something our contemporary minimalism movement sometimes lacks: a robust philosophical foundation for why we're choosing less, and a clear framework for deciding what deserves our attention and what doesn't. This philosophical foundation leads us to perhaps the most practical question of our exploration. How exactly do these ancient insights translate into the psychological freedom that modern minimalists describe? Because when you listen to people who have successfully simplified their lives, they often speak of a profound shift that goes far beyond just having fewer things. They describe a fundamental rewiring of their relationship with desire itself. The Stoics understood something that modern psychology is only beginning to rediscover: that our brains are prediction machines, constantly scanning the environment for what we think we need to be happy in the future. This mechanism, which served our ancestors well when survival was uncertain, becomes a source of endless dissatisfaction in a world of artificial abundance. We find ourselves trapped in what psychologists now call the hedonic treadmill, constantly chasing the next purchase, the next upgrade, the next experience that we believe will finally deliver the satisfaction we're seeking. Marcus Aurelius wrote extensively about this phenomenon in his personal journal, which we now know as the Meditations. He observed that every time he acquired something he had desired, the pleasure was brief and quickly replaced by anxiety about losing it or craving for something else. He called this the tyranny of more. The way that each satisfied desire seems to generate two new ones, creating an endless cycle of wanting that can never be satisfied through external means. But here's where the Stoic approach becomes genuinely revolutionary. Instead of trying to satisfy these desires, they practiced what we might call desire examination. Before making any purchase or commitment, they would pause and ask themselves a series of questions that cut straight to the heart of their motivation. Am I buying this because I genuinely need it, or because I'm trying to fill an emotional void? Am I acquiring this to solve a real problem, or because I've been convinced by marketing that I have a problem I didn't know existed? Will owning this actually serve my highest values, or am I just responding to social pressure? Epictetus taught his students a practice he called the discipline of desire, a systematic approach to training themselves to want what they have rather than constantly seeking to have what they want. This wasn't about suppressing natural human desires, but about becoming conscious of the difference between authentic needs and manufactured wants. He would have his students regularly practice gratitude for their existing possessions, really seeing and appreciating what they already owned before considering any new acquisition. Modern minimalists often describe a similar process of awakening. They talk about the moment they realized that their possessions were possessing them, that they were spending more time managing, organizing, cleaning, and worrying about their stuff than actually enjoying it. They describe the profound relief of discovering that they could be happy with less, that simplicity itself could be a source of pleasure more lasting than any purchase. This psychological shift creates what the Stoics called ataraxia, a state of serene calmness that comes from no longer being at the mercy of external circumstances. When you truly understand that your happiness doesn't depend on having the latest technology, the most fashionable clothes, or the most impressive possessions, you gain a type of immunity to the anxiety that drives so much of consumer culture. You can appreciate beautiful things without needing to own them. You can enjoy experiences without feeling compelled to document and collect them. Seneca practiced what he called poverty training, regularly giving up luxuries and comforts for short periods to remind himself that his well-being didn't depend on them. Modern minimalists often describe a similar process of gradual reduction, discovering with each item they release that they feel lighter rather than deprived. They learn that the fear of not having enough is almost always worse than the reality of having less. Perhaps most importantly, this psychological transformation frees up enormous amounts of mental energy for what the Stoics considered the real work of human life: developing wisdom, practicing virtue, deepening relationships, and contributing to the common good. When you're not constantly thinking about what to buy, where to store it, how to maintain it, and whether you need to upgrade it, you discover vast reserves of attention and energy that can be directed toward more meaningful pursuits. This is where the true power of combining Stoic philosophy with minimalist practice becomes apparent. It's not just about having fewer things, but about becoming the kind of person who is genuinely free to focus on what matters most. But how do we actually bridge the gap between understanding these principles intellectually and living them authentically in our daily lives? because there's a profound difference between appreciating the wisdom of less is more as an abstract concept and actually developing the discipline to practice it when we're standing in a store, scrolling through our phones, or feeling the social pressure to accumulate more. The Stoics were remarkably practical philosophers. They didn't just theorize about virtue and wisdom. They developed specific daily practices, mental exercises, and behavioral frameworks that could gradually reshape how a person moved through the world. These weren't one-time insights, but lifelong disciplines that required consistent attention and refinement. Marcus Aurelius would begin each day by reminding himself of his core values and examining whether his planned actions aligned with them. Epictetus taught his students to pause before every decision and ask whether it served their authentic flourishing or merely their immediate impulses. Modern minimalists have intuitively rediscovered many of these ancient practices, often without realizing their philosophical heritage. Take the practice that many call the 30-day rule. When you feel the urge to buy something non-essential, you wait 30 days before making the purchase. If you still want it after a month and can clearly articulate how it serves your genuine needs rather than momentary desires, then you consider buying it. This is essentially a contemporary version of what Epictetus called the discipline of impulse, training yourself to pause between stimulus and response, creating space for wisdom rather than simply reacting to every feeling or urge. Seneca practiced what he called evening reflection, spending a few minutes each night reviewing the day's decisions and examining whether they aligned with his deepest values. Many modern minimalists describe a similar practice of regularly auditing their possessions, their commitments, and their use of time. They ask themselves, what did I acquire today, and why? What did I spend my attention on, and was it worthy of that precious resource? What brought me genuine satisfaction, and what left me feeling empty or anxious? One of the most powerful practices that emerges from this intersection is what we might call gratitude inventory, regularly taking time to truly see and appreciate what you already have. The Stoics understood that gratitude isn't just a nice feeling, but a form of mental training that gradually rewires your brain's default settings. When you consistently practice noticing and appreciating your existing possessions, relationships, and experiences, you naturally become less susceptible to the constant marketing messages telling you that happiness lies in the next purchase. This might mean spending 5 minutes each morning really looking at and appreciating 3 objects in your home, considering their history, their function, and the ways they serve your life. It might mean practicing what Buddhists call loving kindness toward your possessions, treating them with care and respect rather than taking them for granted or constantly wishing they were different or newer. When you develop genuine appreciation for what you have, the compulsive desire for more naturally begins to fade. The Stoics also practiced what they called preferred indifference, learning to engage fully with life while holding outcomes lightly. In practical terms, this means you can enjoy beautiful objects, comfortable spaces, and pleasant experiences without becoming attached to them or defining your identity through them. You can appreciate a well-designed tool or a beautiful piece of art without needing to own it. You can enjoy a luxurious experience without feeling that your life is somehow lacking when it's over. Modern minimalists often describe discovering this same balance. They're not ascetics who reject all pleasure or beauty, but people who have learned to distinguish between authentic enjoyment and compulsive consumption. They might choose to own fewer, higher quality items that they truly love and use regularly, rather than accumulating many things that provide only brief satisfaction. They invest in experiences and relationships rather than constantly upgrading their possessions. Perhaps most importantly, both ancient Stoics and modern minimalists understand that this is fundamentally about freedom. The freedom to make conscious choices about how you spend your time, energy, and resources rather than being driven by unconscious habits, social pressures, or marketing manipulation. When you're no longer enslaved by the need to constantly acquire, organize, and maintain an ever-growing collection of possessions, you discover enormous reserves of mental and emotional energy that can be directed toward what truly matters to you. This liberation creates space for what the Stoics considered the highest human activities: developing wisdom, practicing compassion, creating meaningful work, and contributing to the flourishing of your community. It's in this space of intentional simplicity that we begin to discover what enough actually feels like. But here's where we encounter one of the most beautiful paradoxes of this philosophy. The moment you truly understand what enough feels like, you discover that you actually have access to far more richness, beauty, and satisfaction than you ever experienced when you were constantly seeking more. It's as if by learning to see clearly, you suddenly realize you've been living in a world of abundance that was always there, hidden beneath layers of distraction and dissatisfaction. Marcus Aurelius wrote about this phenomenon with remarkable clarity. Very little is needed to make a happy life. It is all within yourself, in your way of thinking. He wasn't advocating for poverty or deprivation, but pointing toward something far more profound. When you're no longer mentally and emotionally scattered across dozens of desires and anxieties about what you lack, you can actually be fully present to experience the depth and richness of what's right in front of you. Think about the last time you had a truly satisfying meal. Chances are, it wasn't necessarily the most expensive or elaborate food you've ever eaten. It was probably a moment when you were genuinely hungry, fully present, and able to appreciate the flavors, textures, and nourishment without distraction. The satisfaction came not from the quantity or luxury of the food, but from your quality of attention and appreciation. This is the kind of abundance that becomes available when you practice intentional simplicity, not the hollow abundance of having many things you barely notice, but the deep abundance of fully experiencing what you choose to engage with. The Stoics understood that attention itself is our most precious resource. Seneca wrote extensively about the poverty of those who, despite having great material wealth, lived in a state of constant mental scarcity, always worried about losing what they had, always focused on what they still needed to acquire, never able to rest in genuine appreciation of the present moment. He observed that such people were actually living in a kind of self-imposed exile from their own lives, always mentally residing in some imagined future where they would finally have enough to be happy. Modern minimalists often describe experiencing this same shift in their relationship to abundance. When they first begin reducing their possessions, they might feel anxious about having less. But as they continue the practice, they frequently report discovering a sense of spaciousness and richness they hadn't anticipated. Their homes feel more peaceful and beautiful with fewer, more carefully chosen objects. Their schedules feel more luxurious with fewer, more meaningful commitments. Their minds feel clearer and more creative with less mental clutter from managing and organizing endless stuff. This isn't just about physical possessions, though that's often where people begin. The same principle applies to how we consume information, entertainment, and even experiences. In our current culture, we're often encouraged to maximize everything: to listen to podcasts while walking, to check email while eating, to plan the next vacation while still on the current one. But the Stoics would recognize this as a form of spiritual poverty, a way of being so focused on quantity that we miss the quality entirely. Epictetus taught that true wealth consisted in wanting what you have, rather than having what you want. This wasn't resignation or settling for less. It was a recognition that satisfaction and joy are internal states that arise from how we relate to our circumstances, not from the circumstances themselves. When you develop the capacity to truly appreciate your current life, your relationships, your work, your daily experiences, you discover reserves of contentment and gratitude that no amount of external acquisition could provide. This creates what we might call qualitative abundance. Instead of trying to maximize the number of things you own, experiences you have, or achievements you accumulate, you learn to maximize the depth and quality of your engagement with whatever you choose. You might read fewer books, but read them more thoughtfully. You might own fewer clothes, but choose pieces you genuinely love and feel good wearing. You might have fewer social commitments, but invest more deeply in the relationships that truly nourish you. The ancient Stoics and modern minimalists have both discovered that this approach doesn't lead to a smaller, more restricted life. It leads to a life that feels both more manageable and more meaningful. When you're not constantly managing the anxiety of wanting more or the overwhelm of having too much, you create space for presence, creativity, and genuine connection. You discover that having enough isn't about reaching some external standard of sufficiency, but about developing an internal sense of completeness that allows you to engage with life from a place of fullness rather than emptiness. And it's from this place of genuine abundance, this sense of having enough, that we can begin to explore what it means to live not just with less, but with intention, purpose, and authentic joy.